We back and Brotha from the Inglewood podcast once again, coming to you live and direct. It's good to be back into the studio. I'm Hoopie with my co-host Charley Mack.
Yeah.
And we're getting ready to introduce another hot topic. But before I do, I'm gonna throw it to Charley Mack.
Hey, we in the building, y'all. Once again, giving it to you raw and uncut. But before we do, we don't own the rights to this music, you dig? But it sure sound good, don't it, Cam?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
Okay. So look, put them seatbelts on, strap them on tight. We're about to give y'all that. Let's get it going.
Well said. Well said. Again, it's good to be back in the studio and to be able to chop it up once again. And we got a really good topic to discuss. And hopefully you, the viewing audience, will be able to chime in. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to those that may want to listen in on what we're doing and follow our progress, because this is a really wonderful platform that we believe that we're on, and it's an honor to be able to come to you once again. The topic today we want to discuss is, if you had a time machine, what year would you go back to and why? If you had a time machine, what year would you go back to and why? I'm gonna let you get a crack at it, bro.
You gonna send it over to me, huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You know, man, it's funny because for not any type of educational reasons why or whatever, but I just always been fascinated with the 50s, man.
The 50s?
The 50s. I don't. It just seems like the 50s was a time where the teenagers, you know, they had a good time. Everything was simple. You know, they had malt shops and drive-ins so they can go get a burger and fries. I like the music of the 50s. I love the music of the 50s. I like the style, the way that they dressed in the 50s. It's just something about the 50s, man, that has always just amazed me.
Yeah.
So I probably would go back to the 50s first.
Yeah.
You know.
Being that neither one of us were born in the 50s, I think it really creates an imagination, because I think if I was able to relive a particular era through a time machine process, I don't know, man. I think I would want to see the Roaring 20s. I mean, it was different, but it seemed like in the Roaring 20s, it was like a up-tempo type of scene. The styles, the way the women wore the hats and they wore the long gloves and the long. Remember those cigarette holders that some of the men even wore, and it just seemed like it was a lot of style.
That was the Prohibition era back in the 20s when they outlawed alcohol.
Okay.
And everybody was doing it under the table, and it was illegal.
Okay.
To sell alcohol.
Right. So I mean, when I started to look at the way they dressed, the styles that they wore, of course, we didn't see a whole lot of black people on television, but we did see, and those pictures were captured of black Americans that were, I would say under the radar, so to speak.
Right.
But it was the styles. All the men wore suits, as they did in a lot of other areas in that time. But I don't know, the Roaring 20s seemed to be a time where everything was cutting edge.
Right.
You were evolving, you were in the 19th century, and things were like, really picking up, the inventions, and, it just, to me, it seemed like it was a really, really fun time.
It was also a depression in the 20s. I think it was 1929.
The 30s, the 30s, the Great Depression.
The Great Depression was 1929. No, 1929.
Okay.
The Great Depression.
Yeah.
It's we're just having fun with this topic, when we think about going back. But, in a nutshell, if you really want to know the truth about it, for us as black people, we don't even want to go back in time.
Oh,
it wasn't good for nobody black.
Right.
Whether it's the 1800s,
Right.
the 1900s,
Right.
the 50s,
Right.
the 60s.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
so we're just really being nostalgic here and having a little fun with it. But but yeah, if you really think about it, it wasn't good for black people to go back in time. If you wanted to go back in those eras, because the black people in the 50s had it bad.
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
I think our grandparents were probably raising like our mom and our aunts. They came up. They were kids, babies in the 50s, like the early 50s.
Yeah.
And then probably in the latter part of the 50s, they were like 10, 11 years old, and then they didn't become like teens until like the 60s, 62, 63, whatever. But yeah, man, it's just something about the 50s when I see movies on TV and it's, I think it's the music, because I really, I'm a music lover of all genres of music. Whether it's, I'm one of those guys where you come in my car, man, and I'll be playing Frank Sinatra, and then you come back the next day and I'm listening to some classical Tchaikovsky and now you come back again, I'm listening to some hip hop. So I'm just a music lover of music, So, but it's just, I think the era of the 50s and the certain years of the 70s and the 80s had the best music.
Yeah.
Period.
And it kind of gets us to the B part of the question, which is why would I choose that era to be a part of? I think also it created a system to where inventions were on the rise, and businesses were more mom and pop.
I was just thinking about that.
They were kind of family
I was just thinking
owned,
about that.
family designed and organized.
I was thinking
they were
about
family ran.
I was thinking about that.
So I saw entrepreneurship in that era, where, of course, we get everything from history. Right. So we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't had history. So that was kind of impressive to me to see that all types of ethnicities were creating their own. They had farms. They were in produce. They were in dairy. They were in wood, lumber. They were fishers. You had a lot of fishermen, male and female. So when I look at the 20s, I'm thinking of, okay, this is the beginning of a
era.
That really emphasized entrepreneurship.
And it's funny that you said that. You made me have some flashbacks when we came to Inglewood. Do you remember back in the day, this is back in the 70s, do you remember that there was no there was no Home Depot. There was no these big warehouses where you can go and buy, lumber and this. I mean, it was like you said, it was mom and pop thing. Remember the guy that on the corner of Prairie, he had a hardware store?
Yeah.
And it was mom and pop.
Yeah.
It was a hardware store. You go buy your nuts and screws, because that's why we buy our stuff. When we made these go-karts, we would go there to buy nuts and bolts or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was mom and pop store. And then even gas stations, if you go back and look at, even some of the buildings are still standing today. If you go back and look at certain neighborhoods, even Wayne's shop, his shop was a mom and pop shop, and on the top of it, you could live there.
Yeah.
And that's how they did back in the era, back in the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah.
They
their
lived.
properties were attached to their business.
Even the stores. Like you had a little local store, and then the house was on top.
The barbershops too.
Yeah, even
the front of it was the barbershop, and then you was like, okay, where does that door lead to?
The house.
Well, that was their house.
Yeah. Even when Mr. What's that mean old dude's name?
Mr. Battle?
No, he used to cut our hair, but Mr. Spencer.
Mr. Spencer at the cafe.
Why his wife was extremely nice, but why was he so mean?
He just wanted us as kids to conduct ourselves.
Oh, he was a mean dude, man.
He just wanted you to.
But we had manners and respect back in that era.
But not
as
all
kids.
the kids.
Most of us did.
But I think that was why he was so.
Yeah, but the wife was so nice. But anyway, they had that cafe.
Yeah.
Food was good. The
French fries.
The fries.
Man.
And then they lived
The
right
French
across the
fry.
street.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you were saying, they had that. They owned all that.
Yeah, they did. It was their place. Yeah.
No, even the house, they owned that.
Yeah, they did.
And then remember the guy on the corner of not Ascot, but of Compton Avenue and 46?
Yeah, the liquor store.
No, the what was his name? He had the mom and pop, and he lived
Meat market.
Not Herbs.
Okay.
What was his name? He was right on the corner of Big Mama's now.
46.
He was on the corner of Compton Avenue and 46.
Is that where
He was
a pig feet?
Yep, he was a black man, and it was him and his wife, and they lived right next door.
It was like a
what was his name?
corner store, like a. It had a grocery.
It was a mom and pop.
Right, it was a mom and pop
But
store.
it's so funny that the black people then, back in the 50s and 60s and maybe the late 40s, they had that entrepreneur type of spirit. They knew what it meant to own your own home and to own your own business. Some way, somehow, that's kind of gotten away from this culture and in the 80s and the 90s or whatever. But back then, it was what they did. I can't think of that man's name, but he was nice though. We used to go there and buy like licorice and penny licorice, and he had everything there.
Yeah.
It's like Mr. Spencer had the thing. I forgot that man's name, but he was a nice old man.
Yeah.
He lived right next door to the Hallelujah lady.
Yeah.
Remember her, don't you?
Yeah.
The Hallelujah lady.
Well, the wonderful thing about those eras, and like I said, I mean, I wasn't born in the 20s. I'm just looking at the era that caught my attention because of the style of dress, the entrepreneurship that was on display. It seemed like, banking was sort of secondary.
Right.
People kept their money at home. People pretty much had their earnings. And when the insurance guy came around, he usually came to the house.
Remember?
So when I think of, the 20s, I'm thinking of also jazz music that was really big.
Oh yeah.
With Louis Armstrong was born in 1901.
Right.
And
was he?
Was
it 1901?
Yeah, he was born in 1901.
Wow.
So when you look at his maturation, he became one of the greatest trumpeteers of all time, and he got a chance to really be a part of 5 generations
of some greats.
Of greats, and
Frank Sinatra was
he saw Billie Holiday come along.
I think she was born in 26.
He was much older than she was, but I just think that was a time when we can reflect and see
the roaring 20s,
the maturation and the progress that America was making at that time.
See, but
mind you, it was still segregation,
and you got to understand something too, man. The 20s was a tough era. The mob was gunning people down, and it was one of those eras where it was kind of really a immigrant era when you had the immigrants coming over from Italy, and the Italians and. So it was really the Jewish community was coming over, migrating from their country over to this country in the 1920s.
Of course.
And they all lived together. That's how Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel and all of them, they all lived in the same neighborhood. Yeah. The Jewish community lived with the Italians in all the same poor neighborhoods back in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
All those kids they were all poor.
Yeah.
The Italians and the Jewish community, they were all poor.
Yeah.
They had them all in one certain section in
they
Chicago
and
in New York and in Philly.
Well, they call them ghettos because people have to understand ghetto does not mean that you're ignorant or it doesn't mean that, you're just necessarily impoverished.
Right.
A ghetto is the majority of one ethnicity.
Right.
And a lot of people, they spin it the wrong way.
Right.
And we make it hip and cool. I'm ghetto fabulous or I'm
Right.
But what they have to understand is it just means the majority of one ethnicity.
Right.
And so when those Jews lived together in New York City, and when those communities, they had communities. They had Little Italy. Right there in, I believe it was in Brooklyn.
It's in Brooklyn.
It was, on the outskirts of some of the normal communities that were there, and they were a small section, but they called that part of Brooklyn Little Italy. And I think that's the importance of understanding the eras and why these things took place, who was in that era, and what we can gain from it or
Right.
learn moving forward. So yeah, I think the 20s was pretty much impressive. If I could go to another era,
Yeah.
I love the 60s. The music was fantastic. I was, born in the late 60s, so I didn't get a chance to really move around in that particular decade, but it led into the 70s. But the 60s, when you read about it, when civil rights, you had the Jim Crow problem that was taking place. You had so many urban leaders that were making an impact. Malcolm X.
Yeah.
When you read about these greats, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
they were doing it under duress.
Yeah, see that cowboy era was also pretty amazing to me. I think I would go back to the 1800s, man.
Is that the cowboy era?
Yeah, I mean that's back when they were before cars. You talking about 18
horses. Yeah.
But and it's amazing when you think about, because it's people don't understand. It's hard for us to fathom that this world and people have been here for over for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to fathom. You start talking about BC and AD and 15th century, whatever. It's hard to fathom that.
Yeah.
It's almost like, nah, was that really true? Yes.
Yeah.
But the 1800s, you can kind of say, okay, when you think about the whole cowboy thing, I mean, think about the things that they didn't have. They didn't have running water.
Yeah.
They didn't have bathrooms. They didn't even have a third of the things that we have now. And those people survived in 1854 and in 1820s and 1860s. I mean, they actually were surviving in that era. So when I see that era portrayed on screen and I look at certain, I'm like, man, I mean, you think, you start thinking about the hygiene.
Yeah.
Of the people in the 18. He's like, well, damn, you can't even take a bath. Not when you want a regular shower. Right. Cowboys robes.
Seems like you have to have money to have like running.
Right.
Where nobody had running water. But just to have access to clean water, because it seemed like even in those brothels, it was like they had access to clean water, but it's crazy because the resources weren't there. They weren't as advanced, but they learned how to navigate through those restrictions and limitations to get to where we are today. So I still love to hear the sound of the horses, when they were riding them, or even when the horses
we was like that when we was kids.
Yeah, you can hear them, snarling and just kind of breathing in and out.
Yeah. It's funny. That's a trip, because even with mom and them, sometimes I'll be thinking about it and I'll be wanting to ask her, like, well, did burgers taste the same back then, or because it's almost like the world has evolved so much and time has gone so fast. It's hard for us to look at the 60s and the 50s and say, well, dang, because all the prices were different. Was foods the same? Did they taste the same?
No.
Did they,
No.
So it's a trip. I want to ask,
Well, you can go back to just when you were a child and think about the food and how it was prepared and who prepared it and what it tasted like when we were little boys and early teens up until now. It's totally different. Everything is totally different. Why? Because most of the food now is pasteurized. It's processed. It's the dairy isn't really dairy.
They got all these chemicals.
You got people developing all types of diseases, and it's really from the food.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not trying to be a nutritious specialist and expert, but I am saying I know the difference between what I put in my body some years ago as opposed to what I'm willing to put into my body now.
Right.
I mean, even I think of my oldest son, Micah. He doesn't like milk.
He never have?
Never have. And
Wow.
and I never liked milk.
Me, I wasn't
So
a big
I'm not a
milk
big
person
milk
either.
guy. So when he wasn't, really taken to milk, I mean, we didn't pressure him and say, you going to drink this milk, because we realized too, well, if the milk is not good for me, it can't be good for these young people.
Yeah.
And if it's, giving me problems, like some people are lactose intolerant, I don't believe that it's always been that way, bro. I don't believe people, I think people of color, we have a different system. But whatever you, sort of, conveniently become accustomed to, you adapt to.
Yeah.
Right? So you learn to eat things and drink things that really don't agree with your body.
Yeah.
But pretty soon, your body just say, nah, I don't want it no more.
Yeah.
And it just started, backfiring on you. And so yeah, I mean, the food was different. The culture was different. Even, the styles, clothing and all that was different. But those were good times, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I look at pictures of, like, when you said that 1920s era, you're right. The style was amazing. You look at some of the black art and the black photos from that Renaissance era in Harlem and in Chicago in the early 1900s, man. And it's amazing when you look at how well black families looked and how they dressed and the style that they had. And it's sad the way that our culture and all the obstacles was placed in our way for us to fail.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was telling you, I'm going to jump off topic, but I don't know if it was you that we were talking about it, but I had seen this little history thing about maybe a month ago when the first black family owned that property down there in Manhattan Beach.
Yeah.
And then then the white city of Manhattan Beach came in and pretty much stole that black family's. It was a black man and his wife.
Yeah.
And they owned that property right down on Highland Street.
And that little park.
Yeah,
that was their property.
yeah, and they stole it.
Yeah.
And it was just that property is worth so much money right now.
Yeah.
And for that black family to be able to even think forwardly like that back then and say, we're going to purchase this land and purchase it. That's amazing.
Well, it speaks to the evolving of time and culture, because entrepreneurship, I believe, always existed. When you start going even way back to the biblical days, they were raising cattle.
Right.
They had sheep and oxen. They had fruits and vegetables. They had fish from the ocean. So I think as it evolved, people were able to take full advantage of opportunities. Whereas we know some ethnic races, such as African Americans, were not afforded the same privilege, right?
Right.
But piggybacking on what you said earlier about seeing photos and looking at images, man, if you think about it, in the 20s, I'll just say the late 1800s, the early 1900s, man, people didn't have acne. They didn't have bad skin.
Right.
They didn't have these these
Unorthodox
diseases and stuff that they were catching. I mean, yeah, they died of some simple stuff because it was really the knowledge wasn't there.
The medicine and
Yeah.
all that.
It wasn't as advanced, right?
Yeah.
And so it was many miles away from a doctor or a physician or a dentist. People were dying of toothaches because it would get.
They would get infected.
Exactly.
They would get infected, and then they would die from the
poisons,
the bacteria, and all that
right.
stuff.
So I say all that to say, it was something in the food. When you look at these old photos, when we look at Big Mama and Big Daddy, and how clear their skin was, and how up until Big Mama was, I would say, man, 89 or 87. She had never been to the hospital, bro.
I No.
She had never been to the hospital.
Well, she never went nowhere to get sick.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But still.
No,
I mean,
you're right. You're right. You're right.
And she ate pork all her life.
You're right.
She
You're
ate
right.
dairy.
You ain't lying.
She,
She never ate
she
healthy.
ate sweets.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is,
yeah, you're right.
you know, it was to me, it was just a different situation where intelligent minds, bright, fresh thinkers were developing things that were really detrimental to our health.
Yeah.
They were this stuff was created in some lab, some scientific experiment. And I'm not saying that our scientists created something to destroy humanity, because that's a whole different topic.
Right.
But realistically, looking in my finite mind,
Right.
I'm like, I can look at these 3 to 4 decades, and I know it's a big difference than where we are now.
Yeah.
You know?
So
if I got into a time machine, I would love to go to that era, but I would also love to be in an era where I could learn more, you know, make a different contribution.
Right.
You know, think about it. If we had advanced technology like we do today, it would have saved a lot of lives in the 1700s, 1800s, and you know, some of this stuff would just be curtailed.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm just thinking, you know, for those that are viewing and, you know, you contemplate, but you don't really always have a conversation about it. I know it sounds nostalgic, but think about, you know, what would you do if you were afforded an opportunity to go back in time?
Yeah.
What would you do differently?
Right.
What would how would you impact, you know, your community, your world, or your era? You know, a lot of us, we think all the time, man, if I would have just did this, if I'd have just did that. But I think it's noteworthy to revisit that, because it'll help us to this present moment.
Yeah.
If you were able to go to a different era, why would you do that? How would you do that? And then bring it into this present day.
Yeah.
And say, you know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's all fantasy, and if you could, you know, to go back in time and to disrupt the whole kind of time continuum, you would change things. Like, you went back in the 50s and you don't belong back in the 50s, and you start messing around in the 50s, and then you come back here, things will be different.
Yeah.
And that's why time travel has always been pretty, even though it's fantasy, but it's always been pretty amazing to me. Like, it really, really holds my attention when I watch TV or a movie and it's about time. Oh, dude, it's amazing. That's why I probably like Twilight Zone. So that's why I'm such a big fan of Twilight. No, seriously, I'm a big fan of Twilight Zone, man.
Yeah.
Because it's always about the episodes where it's about, you know, going back in time, and you know, the one guy went back and tried to stop the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and it's just, I mean, that kind of stuff, dude, just blows my mind.
Okay.
It always has.
Okay, I got you.
It always has.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed time, you know, the Twilight Zone. I guess I'm a drama documentary dude anyway.
Yeah.
So it's appealing to be able to reminisce, but also gain something from the information that you're following. But a lot of people, man, they think about these kind of things, but they don't talk about it.
I know.
They imagine, you know, and some people live in that state of mind, and they escape the present moment, because in those times, that is where they found a lot of peace or comfort.
Right.
And that's why I was telling you before we had this conversation. Sometimes you drive down the street and you see a person, and it's not that their vehicle is old, it's not that they're in a classic, but you listen to their music that they're listening to, and it's something from like 4 and 5 decades ago. And you're like, why are they listening to that? But obviously, that is the type of music that they appreciated most. And then it's probably a time period in their life where that was the best time of their life.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
You know,
I don't. Yeah.
You know,
I mean, because we got friends right now. You know, 2 in particular who you know, every time you talk to them, it's they can't get out of the 80s. Or they can't get out of the past.
No year. they can't get out of no.
Yeah, it's like, you like, dude, can you talk about anything else?
Right.
You know, and that's it. But some people are more comfortable in a time in their life where they felt like this was the happiest time of my life, and they don't want to get out of it.
Yeah, but it's crazy because who can benefit? I mean, sharing it with other people, how can they benefit? We have to think of it like that too. Like, okay, those were some good times, but every time we get together,
this is what you're going to talk about?
Talking about.
Yeah.
So that means that somebody's not moving forward.
Yeah.
And you know, life is going. So
yeah,
but you're right.
If you don't go with it, you're gonna get stuck.
Exactly. So it's like it's very difficult to, you know, change anybody or change their mindset, but we can be an influence and say, well, listen, I'm enjoying the moment. Let's talk about this, or let's do this, and maybe you could combine the two, and you have more to go on.
Right.
But you know, it's again, it's been great just to reminisce and raise the question to you, the viewing audience, as it relates to think about it. If you could go back through a time machine, what era would you like to be in, and why? I think you would find a lot of food for thought in that process, and then you could share that. You could put it in the comments. You can share it with other people. So we want to say thanks for following us today. Want to say we appreciate the Coalesce Group for all that you're doing in the athletic community as well as the academic community. We've appreciate Fruit Off the Vine, Urban Apparel, that's really allowed us to partner with them in this endeavor, and we just want to say thank you for sponsorship, and to whoever that feel as though we can be of benefit partnering through sponsorship. You're more than welcome to follow the link, subscribe, and share. It would be fantastic to have you aboard and for us to be one of your partners. And so without further ado, I'm going to give it to Charlie Mack and let him close us out.
Just to piggyback on what Cam said, if you guys have ideas and you're following along with us and you're watching the show, if you guys have any kind of particular topic that you may want to hear, or you may want us to talk about, don't hesitate by leaving it in the comments below, and we'll try to get to it, and we'll try to get to it in an expeditious manner. But at any rate, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you guys for taking the time. The ones who are viewing, thanks for taking the time to check us out. This is a slow burn right here, and I think it's going to get better.
Yeah.
We got some positive stuff going on over here, and it's not anything negative. So we'll definitely find our audience, and we'll definitely grow. But we're going to keep on doing this, even if we got to do it with what we're doing with now. I think it's pretty cathartic, and I do enjoy it. I get a chance to spend time with my brother here.
Yes, sir.
So,
yes, sir.
So that's always a blessing. So thank you guys. Peace and love. See you guys next time.
Peace.